live on YouTube in just one moment. Uh, okay, so this afternoon we have a couple more panel sessions that are also related to corruption in government, principally. Our first panel session is on corruption and public administration, and then following that, we will have a couple of presentations on criminal justice in the Americas. So, uh, please, everyone, maintain your microphones on mute. Apaguen sus micrófonos, por favor. Any questions in the chat of the Zoom or the comments of the YouTube. And I would like to welcome Manuel Gerke of Bocconi University in Italy, who will speak on Mayor's political survival and legislators' enrichment after anti-corruption audits. This will be a presentation in English.
Okay, hello everybody. I'd like to thank the organizers of this exciting conference and as well as everybody for participating. So today I'm going to talk about, to show you some results of a big project that I have on how politicians react to anti-corruption investigations, right? So we have a lot of, even though we have a lot of anecdotal evidence of politicians reacting, trying to change the rules of the game, or trying to bribe, to block investigations. We don't have enough systematic investigation, so I'm going to try to provide some evidence of what happens after politicians are investigated and corruption is revealed. Okay. So let me start in the north, in this city in the northwest of Brazil. So this town called Ouro Preto do Oeste received a team of auditors in 2010, and they found that the municipal government had received the money to buy 2 school buses, exactly like this one, but when they flew in the municipality, they could only find one, and the mayor could not show exactly where the money to buy another one of these buses had gone to, right? Even though these auditors found this evidence was presented and put into a report. This report was sent to the different local authorities, including the judiciary, the local legislature, the media. The mayor, who you can see here on the left, and whose party had only 2 seats out of the 9 seats in the local council. He not only managed to avoid impeachment, but also to be reelected with 75% of the votes 2 years later. Okay, so this is just an example for you to give you some more intuition of the kinds of things I'm going to try to explain. Why how can politicians like this avoid impeachment, right? Why is something in the democratic process failing to reduce corruption, right? And how these politicians are able to survive in office and to even get elected for another term. So there has been a lot of attention, right? There have been great reforms that have to deal with corruption in the last 2 decades mostly, right? But when observers of these policies and reforms evaluate their effect, right, they say that the performance of these reforms has not been great, right? So part of my project is trying to understand why, right? So why are we failing to conceive better policies and achieve a lower level of corruption in general, right? So I look at some of the most prominent policies to combat corruption, right, which are audits of government, right? These are done by independent parties and are extremely technical, and in some countries, in some contexts, they are protected from political interference, right? And these are among the policies that are argued by both scholars and institutions as some of the best policies to combat corruption, especially in developing countries. Right, and we also have this view from like democratic theory, right? That we believe that sunlight is one of the best disinfectants, right? So we try to think that if voters, because corruption is hidden, right? Once voters have the information, right, the political system should react, and voters should be able to change the way that governments operate, right? This is one of the basic tenets of democratic accountability. However, in many places where voters are presented with information about corruption, these do not have the expected effects, right? This has been the case of Mexico, like many of you probably know, this paper by Chongarol that finds that when voters are presented with information about corruption at the local government in Mexico, turnout decreases, but the ability of the incumbent politicians to stay in office and the incumbent party does not change. Right, the same happens in this big Meta-Cata initiative, which spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in this study that was done in six different countries that has now been condensed, and there's a meta-analysis showing that revealing information about corruption to voters does not have meaningful effects, right? So I'm going to give you now some more information about how exactly these audits in Brazil work, and try and show you that also in the context of Brazilian municipalities, these audits have not had the political impact that we would assume if everything was going as expected, right? If voters are presented with evidence about corruption and they would punish politicians, right? And this would make politicians commit less corruption, right? So in Brazil, starting 2003, it's probably a program many of you already heard about, right? So these audits is a team of auditors at the federal government who are highly professional and independent, right? They are civil servants, so not appointed by the government. They are among the best, the most qualified people in the Brazilian bureaucracy, right? And so they investigate how municipalities used federal transfers, right? And most of the municipal budgets comes from the something like 80% of the budget of the municipal budgets come from the federal government, and these budgets are quite large, right? So Brazil is one of the most decentralized countries in the world, right? And these municipal budgets account for 6.5% of the country's GDP, which is high in comparison to the vast majority of countries, right? And this program over time has investigated 20 billion US dollars of public funds, right? And this includes what I list here in terms of like how the expenditure, how are the public tenders conducted, how are like details about the contracts, the infrastructure quality, and the service delivery, right? So these are quite comprehensive audits, right? And in more than 2/3 of them, these auditors have found at least one serious incident of malfeasance, right? Nevertheless, the municipalities that have been audited, the mayors were as likely to be reelected to another term, right? So there is mayors in Brazil can run for one consecutive reelection, right? So they were as likely to be reelected as the places that did not receive auditors, right? If you compare the re-election rates for the municipalities that are here in red, right, with those in blue, you can see that there isn't a significant difference over time, right? So if you look in more detail in the places where these auditors found corruption and the places where they did not, it's not the case either that the re-election rates, depending on what was found, is different, right? So the places where a lot of corruption was found, the mayor was as likely to be re-elected as in the places that were not audited or where the places where no corruption was found. Okay, so the puzzle is, right, so we know from many big corruption scandals across the world, right, that in many cases, corruption helped to bring together coalitions, right? It helped to keep these coalitions in government. right? But what happens, we don't know very well what happens when once corruption is revealed, right? Do these coalitions that could not, as Scott would say, right? A famous scholar from on corruption from like writing a long time ago, right? So would say that these coalitions that could not survive the light of the day, right? Would they continue to exist once everybody knows that what is keeping like the extent to which corruption is helping to keep these coalitions together, right? So this is something that I'm looking at in my project, right? So how do these incriminated politicians prevent defections in their coalitions, right? That we would expect to happen after corruption is revealed. Okay. So my argument is that these anti-corruption interventions, in this case, the audits, right, they prompt incriminated politicians to change the way they share their political rents in exchange for political survival. Okay, so so one of the ways through which, right, audits could lead to less corruption would be through electoral sanctioning, like I told you before, right, which is one of the most studied topics in corruption, right, that we have mostly no results, right, the ones I talked to you about before. There's also an important way through which audits, because the audits can inform judges, right, and prosecutors on corruption cases, right? And so this could be another way through which these audits could affect the level of corruption, right? If politicians are threatened with criminal prosecution, right? They would probably lower their corruption. And I'm looking here in these specific results that I'm going to show to you, but I do some more work about the two others in my book project, right? And I already presented to you some evidence about the lack of electoral sanctioning in the same context, right? But I'm looking here at like, why does legislative oversight fails? Okay, and I'm going to present you some systematic evidence about that. So to give you some more intuition about how these municipal governments in Brazil work, for the people who are not very familiar with this context, right? So voters have two votes, right? They vote for a mayor and for someone in the city council, right? And typically the mayor is from one party and the vice mayor, even though they're elected on the same ticket, they are from a different party, right? Because the vice mayor is said to help to construct a legislative shield, right, for the local executive to achieve a majority in the city council, which is important to pass laws, but also to prevent investigations against corruption, right? So the mayor wants to have a majority in the city council for many reasons, but so the mayor and the vice mayor are usually from different parties, right? And the mayor is responsible for selecting the cabinet. So the cabinet positions are one of the things that the mayor can exchange with city council members, right? So if you want to construct a governing coalition, you can usually invite politicians and party members from the different parties in the city council, right? So these councillors are elected through an open list PR system, right? That's why we have a lot of fragmentation in most city councils, right? And the mayor's party does not have a majority in 90% of the municipalities in Brazil, right? So you need to, in order to have the reforms or the laws, the budget that the mayor favors approved, they need to construct a majority, right? But also to avoid being investigated, right? So after an audit is revealed, the local council receives these reports, right? And they can decide whether to act on it or not, right? They can have more parliamentary hearings, right? They can decide to investigate the local executive more closely, right? So, and after investigating, they can also decide to impeach the mayor or not, right? For you to start an investigation, you need the majority in the council, right? But for you to impeach the mayor, you need 2/3, right? So I'm going to use this to investigate the relationship between mayor and the individual legislators, right? So I argued that this relationship is characterized as a non-cooperative multilateral bargaining, right? No matter for the mayor wants to have a majority to avoid investigations, right? But doesn't really matter where these votes will come from, right? And it's impossible for the mayor and the council members to write a contract that will always make the legislatures vote with the executive, right? So once the situation changes after, for example, an audit reveals that the local executive is involved in corrupt transactions, the legislatures will be able to negotiate again their support, whether they're going to support the mayor or not, right? And I argued that as I showed to you before, right, the mayor needs the support of a proportion of legislators to block further investigations, right? And they also want to avoid that the vice mayor builds an alternative coalition, right? Even though the vice mayor is usually from a different party and could try to build an alternative coalition that would then lead to the impeachment of the mayor, because the vice mayor would be the one benefiting in case the mayor is impeached. Right, so one of my assumptions is that the mayor has a higher degree of control over legislatures in her own party, right? So they can prevent whether these people will get on a good position on the ticket for future elections, or can have a cost in terms of like they are seen as very close to the mayor, right? I also argued that assume that it's easier for the mayor to negotiate with someone in her original coalition, right? Because they have engaged with in many things, such as like the way that they finance their campaigns together, or they probably know more. They are more able to reciprocate things with people who were originally with them, right? Or have interacted more with them instead of someone in the opposition. So I here show to you my hypothesis, right? So I argued that the effects of audits on councillors' wealth is mediated by the share of additional council members the mayor needs to attract out of those that are not in the mayor's party, right? So what is the proportion of people from other parties who the mayor needs to make sure that they are like with them, right, to avoid further investigations, right? And I also, so my hypothesis too is that these audits prompt incriminated mayors to favor councillors not in their party, but people who joined, like who were previously in the same electoral coalition with them. And I also show that, argue that when the mayors are eligible for re-election, right, when they're not term limited, they have higher incentives to prevent defections by non-co-partisans, because these people would be important for them to build their re-electoral coalition. Okay, so I use the lotteries that select which municipalities are audited in each state, right, over time in Brazil, and compare those, similar to what I showed to you about the re-election rates, right? I compared those that were audited and those that are not audited in each state, right? And I aggregate this. And I also take advantage of a regression discontinuity design about whether the legislature's coalition party won or not the mayoral race, meaning that whether you are or you're not in the mayor's coalition, right? To compare those who won and those who lost, and see the effect that having been in the mayor's coalition has on their wealth, right? And compare those places that are audited and or not. So I use data from the affidavits that all electoral officials have to provide and are available, right? So this contains, for example, information on very detailed information about the model of the car they own, the house the address of the house they own, and all details about their financial assets and everything, right? So I look at changes in their wealth accumulation over time, right, to do all this analysis, of course. So one of the analysis, I construct a measure of bargaining power right? From the same, based on the same thing that I said to you before, right? So how many more people does the mayor need to be on their side to avoid being investigated, right? And I find that the wealth accumulation after an audit, right, when comparing audited and non-audited places, right, the effect of audits on legislatures' wealth is higher on places that are audited and where the legislature's bargaining power is higher, meaning that the mayor uh, needs to get the support, right, of a higher net proportion of councillors, right? And these are based on the affidavits and the data provided by more than 42,000 city councillors in Brazil, for the universe of city councillors in Brazil. Okay, so here you see the test for my hypothesis too, right? Meaning that the membership in the mayor's coalition, whether that has an effect, right? Whether the mayor provides more after an audit to be protected, right, from further investigations to those in their own party, right? Which is the case of columns 3 and 4, the third column and the fourth column, right? You can see that there is no effect of being in the mayor's own party, right? Both in the places that are audited and were not, right? But you can see here that the audit changes the effect that being in the mayor's coalition has on a councillor's wealth accumulation. So in places where for people who are from other parties and previously supported the mayor, right? These are all ex ante, right? So before the lotteries were even conducted, you see that the audit has a positive effect on their wealth accumulation for these people in the mayor's pre-electoral coalition, right? You can also see that places that were not audited, there is no effect of having been in the mayor's coalition on the wealth accumulation. Okay, so my test to hypothesis 3, right, which was whether mayors, when they are eligible to run for re-election, they are more likely to favor their previous coalition partners, right, trying to get not only their support to avoid impeachment, but also to try to convince them to join the mayor's coalition again, right? So you can see here on the right that audit has a positive effect on the change in councillors' wealth for those councillors who were in the mayor's coalition, right? So there's a positive difference for when they are audited. You can also see here that there is no effect for those who are in the mayor's party, right? So the councillors in the mayor's party are not able to benefit from material rewards of an audit, right? But it's something different from their coalition partners. So
to wrap up.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just finishing here. So in the case when they're not eligible to run for re-election, right, you don't observe the same thing. So they're not as likely to favor their coalitional partners as they were when they are eligible for re-election. And the whole system works also because these councillors are not punished electorally, right? Because the system is so complicated and it's so hard to attribute a cause, right? But this since not many impeachments happen, and but it's not the case that councillors are punished electorally either, right? So there are many of them, especially in the places where the mayor is weak, they're benefiting, but the voters are not able to observe this game that is happening among the political elites in the municipalities. So that's one of the reasons why this actually works, and they are able to avoid being punished, and the councillors, and another reason why the councillors makes sense for the councillors to do that. Right, so I showed that the ability of incriminated politicians to reoptimize their rent sharing strategy shapes the efficacy of anti-corruption interventions, right? And they are also using the executive office to hamper legislative oversight, right? And helps to explain the why is it so hard to combat. It's one of the reasons why it's so hard to combat corruption. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very well, thank you very much, Manuel. Nice little comic there. Let me see if there are any questions for Manuel. So far, I do not see questions for Manuel. I had one. Oh, yes. So this, you were looking at the effects of an audit on re-election for the mayor and the council, but I was curious to what extent were the outcomes of these audits published in local newspapers, or there's a very nice study on radio ads exposing corruption. I know there's a nice little app on corrupt politicians in Brazil also. So did you look at the exposure of these audits?
Yes, so thanks for the question. So that's an interesting, so I see that the places, so the like most common way, right? So because there are so many municipalities that don't even have a radio station, right? So I look at the places that have a radio station and don't have, right? And the effect in terms of the re-election rates over time throughout the whole period, right? So I analyze the 2004, 2008, 2012, 2016 election, right? So I have many more elections than the previous studies that look into this question, right? But on average, there is no real difference on the places that have the radio stations and don't have, right? Unfortunately, which kind of shows it's kind of like a sad effect of this, that even the places that have radio stations, it does not seem to be like that the game is still able to, so they're still working. So I think that's one of the reasons why is because the local governments are a very important share of the revenues for these local radio stations, right? So they are able to, they might also be able, of course, it would be interesting to analyze and to see whether they're like also the local governments are also re-optimizing, and unfortunately I don't have data on that, so they're buying more ads, for example, from the local radio stations, right? And there's so much connection, right? I have some other work on the media specifically in this context, but there is so much connection and close connection between the owners of this local radio station, and so many of them are politicians themselves, right? Or are very closely connected to the local elites and to the politicians. So that's an interesting topic, but unfortunately the effect. So my guess is that the findings of these audits are not being revealed as much as they should, right? So there could be some alternative mechanisms to give people more information, but also we have research, and even research in Brazil, right, that finds similar thing to me, that's like they're not very effective even when the voters are presented with this quite credible evidence, right? Unfortunately.
Very good, thank you. We need to move along. There is just quickly a yes/no question from Stephen Morris. Do you think the same pattern applies at the federal level since the structural situations are so similar?
I do. So it's not, so we have seen a president, so Michel Temer had very serious evidence of corruption against himself, and he was able to construct a legislative shield, right, that blocked corruption. Of course, it's hard to say, like we have very few cases, right? In the context of municipalities, we have a lot more data that we can investigate this more closely, but I think it's part of, so the mechanisms that I'm observing is part of what's happening in the federal government, right? It's so easy for you to buy off a certain share of the legislatures, right? But it usually depends on how much they themselves are threatened, right? So in 2016, many of the legislators who voted in favor of impeachment thought that they would be better off themselves by voting in favor of the impeachment because the vice president had promised them to stop the investigations, right? So it's quite complicated too. But similarly to differently from the context of the president in Brazil, right? For the mayors, once the investigation starts, there isn't a lower house and an upper house, right? So they don't get out of the government. So in Brazil, when the lower house votes in favor of investigating the president, right, the president has to leave office, right? That's something institutionally that it's different from the presidency and the local government.
Great. Thank you again, Manuel Guerque from Bocconi University. We are pleased that we have presenters and attendees from throughout the world. Our next presenter is also from Europe. Well, she's in Europe, I should say. Fernanda de Figueiredo of King's College London, speaking on looking for an efficient disciplinary and anti-corruption system, controlling internal controls in the Brazilian federal executive. So continuing with the topic of Brazil, and she had a question for you that we didn't get to, so maybe we can talk to each other later. Fernanda,
Hi,
welcome.
Thank you all for having me here. This is still the very, very first draft of a paper, so any comments, critiques, feedback are more than welcome. It's also exploratory paper, and it's part of a wider research in which I look at sanctions against the federal civil servants in Brazil, and mainly sanctions for corruption. And I'm glad to share other finds if you're interested. In this paper, I focus on the disciplinary system, and I try to identify indicators of loss or gain of efficiency. And the main research question here is I'm more interested in understanding how corruption-related cases can be associated with efficiency gain or loss, mainly loss, actually. So as you know, that corruption, very briefly here, can be associated with government inefficiency, weak regulatory frameworks, but also there are academics that see limitations or side effects of anti-corruption mechanisms. So, but we know that punishment is not the only anti-corruption strategy. Neither it is considered the best one to curb corruption, it alone, I mean. But still, punishment is part of the package, and impunity can be a major issue. So I do think that deserves attention, especially with regards to bureaucrat corruption. We still know very little how disciplinary mechanisms operate, especially in Brazil. So Cielito explained in a great way, using the Ecuador case, how Becker see this rational way to analyze benefits, costs and benefits. But Becker reminds, and Stigler reminds us, that corruption is a manifestation of poor enforcement. I have a background in criminology, and it struggles me the fact that criminologists do not look at bureaucrat corruption or corruption as I think they should, especially in terms of punishment. Of course, we do have the white-collar crime framework, but nowadays it's been more used for corporate crime or organized crime. Criminologists are looking at violent crimes or crimes involving the police. They are also bureaucrats, but I guess we should expand the analysis. And so crime opportunity theory reminds us that there are at least 3 elements that need to be in place to a crime happen: a likely offender, a suitable target, and the absence of a capable guardian. although this is not my research question, but it's something that drives me because I keep asking what happens when guardians and offenders are peers, and which kind of constraints we can imagine happening and avoiding certain investigation. And this is particularly the case of Brazil, where civil servants are supposed to to monitor and investigate their own peers. So to be dismissed or to be fired, it's not a criminal court that decides that. It needs to be a disciplinary procedure, an administrative one. So Brazil is a great case study to understand these kind of things. We do have data available. And as you can see here, the dark gray is acts of other offenses not related to corruption. Light gray, corruption-related cases. And from 2003 and 2014, the administrative punishments resulting in what they call expulsion. So basically people being fired for corruption cases increased fast, much rapidly than for other offenses. And what I'm calling corruption here is what the Office of the Comptroller General calls corruption. Basically is abuse, misuse of their own positions for private gains. It includes bribes, it includes embezzlement, nepotism as well, different type of things. Other offenses can also result in dismissals. For example, the accumulation of positions. It's very common in the health system where doctors and nurses who work for federal hospitals, they are civil servants and they cannot work in other places, but they work in private practices as well. Or abandon of the position. If someone stops going to work, they can be fired as well. So it's a severe sanction, but not related to corruption. But then you think, well, it's around 5,000 procedures. Brazil has over 600,000 civil servants. So it's less than 1%. But into perspective, Canada, UK, the US, they also punishes less than 1% of their working force. And again, we are not expecting that every civil servant is breaking the law, and we're not expecting that all of them are corrupt as well. But just to have it into perspective, and these figures here, they are quite hard to get. In the US, I use the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. They deny, arguing that I only asked for the overall figures, but they argue that it's basically a sensitive issue that cannot disclose. But my goal here is try to go beyond these official figures. What's behind that? Especially because in Brazil, the official figures have been using as propaganda. Every single president, they basically, they release press statements and they say they've been punishing and the punishment is increasing, but we do not know exactly who has been punished and also how long it takes to open a procedure to finalize that. If there are people in Brazil, you can, if you're fired, you can appeal to a court and you can manage a comeback, for example. So my goal here is try to assess if it's improving or losing efficiency based in some indicators that I'm going to show to you next. But it's important to have in mind then the terrorist theory again tells us that to be efficient, sanctions need to be fast. You need to be certain that if you break the laws, there is a high chance that you're going to be punished, and sanctions need to be appropriate or severe. As I said, this is an exploratory paper. So these are my tentative hypotheses. And what I'm using to try to measure the certainty and celerity is the percentage of convictions the statute of limitations that expire. So there are procedures that it took so long that you cannot punish or acquaint anyone. You send them to, you close the case without any result. Time taken to open a procedure and to finalize it, and raise statement rates. It's important to have in mind again that criminal procedures and administrative procedures, they run in parallel in Brazil. So it's possible that someone is sentenced to jail, but not convinced, not dismissed. Or the sentence to jail comes first and the dismissal takes a long time to be announced. How I'm trying to measure it. So I do have a massive database with all sanctions enforced against around 3,000 civil servants between 2003 and 2014. And I have individual information on these particular sanctions. I don't have the procedures that did not result in sanctions. I asked, it's a massive limitation of this study, but the Office of the Comptroller General argued that because they were acquainted or nothing happened, they are not going to expose their data. Okay, we work with the data we have. So I do have, Joe, annual figures of the amount of procedures that were open, procedures that were adjudicated, and procedures that are adjudicated with at least one sanction, with no individual level information in the overall figures. I did interview to try to cover some gaps or things that the figures did not tell me, and I also use official documents. Findings. So as you can see here, from 2008 to 2016, around 30,000 procedures were initiated. And only 23% of them were finalized with at least one sanction. Of course, again, we do not expect that this is 100%, but we expect that it's a bit higher, especially because literature in Brazil tells us that administrative procedures, they are more efficient and more likely to punish someone than the criminal courts. When you look at the overall figures at the criminal courts, there's not very much. So there are different types of procedures in the administrative sphere. I'm not going to get into detail, but if you look separating by type of procedure, the percentage of cases being adjudicated with at least one sanction varies from 11 to 28%. The good news is that the procedures used to investigate corruption, they have a higher conviction rate. If you look at the criminal courts, overall crimes, all crimes put together, conviction rates vary from 8 to 27%. So at least the overall figures, there is no big difference between administrative procedures and corruption procedure, and criminal procedures. But again, further research is necessary, especially it would be great to check if those punished in the administrative sphere were also punished in the criminal courts. This is my favorite finding. Green spots are corruption-related cases. Blue ones, other serious offenses. Both resulted in people being fired. This is time taken to open and to finalize a procedure. As you can see, although the range varies a lot, procedures related to corruption, they are not only taking longer, but they are pushing the trend up. As you can see, the range is unbelievable. There were procedures that took over 10 years to be finalized. In average, is non-corruption related cases 1.4 years, corruption 2.3 years. This is a lot. It wasn't like that. And I try to check the most current statistics because this is from 2003 and 2014. In 2018, 93% of the procedures were standing still for more than 6 months. And 40% of the procedures were open over 2 years. So they know this is a problem, and they were trying to change things in the way. The solution that the federal government came up is let's open less procedures. So they created a mechanism that is, if you do something that is not super serious, but it would be serious enough to open a procedure, you're not opening a procedure, we give you a kind of a yellow card. And if you, again, do something wrong, and then you're going to face the consequences. Why time is increasing? According to the interviewees, they point out 3 main reasons. First one, the obvious one. Crimes have been, people sophisticate their actions. So especially corruption cases, more difficult to collect evidence. It takes longer to discover things. But also they say that they do not every civil servant likes to investigate their own peer. So we do have a small number of civil servants carrying out administrative procedures, and they are overloaded. There are civil servants with 17, 20 procedures at the same time. In most of the agencies, so this is important to say that it's not the office of the Controller General that carries out the procedures. Every single agency should have an internal affair unit. If they don't have it, is the human resources department that does this job, and they don't like it. And sometimes they need to do their duties, their daily duties, and also investigate their own peers. And the third explanation to justify this increasing in time or the reduction of speed is the fact that people are going to courts, the defendants, from day one to try to delay the procedures. They are question every single step from day one. We can also observe, I'm not going in details, but it varies a lot. The time taken to open and finalize a procedure depends a lot, can be bigger or this can be faster or slower depending on the agency. Restatement. This is my most frustrating and controversial, I would say, indicator. So restatement, you can go to court and convince a judge that the process or it wasn't fair, or there were technicalities that they should have been observed and they didn't. So in the beginning, it was very, very common to be reinstated. So you go to the court and then the one judge or a group of judges say, okay, you can go back to work. I'm invalidating this administrative procedure. The Office of the Controller General tried to create manuals, training people to investigate their own peers, and then restatement decreased. I was expecting to find a positive correlation between corruption and restatement rates, because it's more difficult to prove, and maybe you know, but you don't have enough evidence, so you really want to push forward. But actually, my data shows the opposite. And although the correlation is very weak, still the data shows that those punished for non-corruption related cases are more likely to get a restatement than those punished for corruption. Here, this is a concerning finding, and around 20% of the procedures, they expire. They end up with no punishment because the statute of limitations period had expired. It's a lot. Finally, I just brought one quote from an interviewee. This in particular interviewee, he defines the administrative procedure and the disciplinary system as a sausage factory, because you can put anything you want inside the procedure. And then he said that you can create a culture of efficiency, but we can also create the inverse culture. We can make it slower, and we can make it time consuming. And he said that it has been happening, and he agrees that procedures are increasing complexity. We do have a niche in Brazil that is the administrative attorneys or lawyers. They discovered this and they are working and specializing in this. But we also have people who do not want to investigate their own peers. Finally, I think that we should relate corruption cases to the efficiency of administrative disciplinary system. And the case of Brazil tells us there is a lot behind this sharp increase in the number of sanctions. So the speed of investigation is declining. Restatement is still common. The disciplinary system is overloaded according to the interviewees. And we do not have strong evidence that the fight against misconduct is very different from the fight against violent crimes. But I think there is a lot, there is data available. I invite everyone to look at them, because we do need to understand better how it works. And I do think that it's very important to control internal controls and to be aware of the side effects and limitations of anti-corruption disciplinary actions. Thank you very much. This is my email, and I'm happy to share my presentation and the paper for feedback and comment as well.
Thank you very much, Fernanda, for a very illuminating presentation. Really interesting research that you have there. A couple of questions from Paul Lunes. He says, Fernanda, earlier today our keynote speaker warned that state-led anti-corruption efforts can be politicized. That is, corruption control can be used to target political rivals. Do you see evidence of politicization? If so, is there evidence that the problem is systematic?
This is a great question. Of course, it's very possible that you can open a procedure against your opponent, or you can make it a political battle. But interestingly enough, I asked that for my interviewees. Most of them are those working for internal affairs units or the Office of the Controller General, and they did not, and I honestly believe them, they did not put the politicization as an issue bigger than the issue that they face difficult to convince civil servants to investigate their own peers. It did not appear as a bigger issue. I'm not saying it does not happen, but I still think that the internal constraints among themselves is something that we need to deal immediately.
Great, thank you. And Brett Barrowman asks, do you have data on the initiators of the case or the target or both? In either case, have you disaggregated by their rank in the civil service? It would be fascinating to see rates of intra or interrank discrimination.
So yeah, unfortunately, they do not list what motivated the procedure. Can be different things. Can be anonymous report, a media report, a statement. Can be a procedure from other accountability agencies, the federal police, the prosecution service, the accounts court. The interviewees, though, they say they prefer, and it's more likely to result in sanctions, those procedures that came from the police and the prosecution service. Of course, the evidence is already collected. I can tell you that men are more likely to be sanctioned than women, and it's statistically significant. those who are not in the 5 first years of their careers, but it varies a bit. You have 2 peaks from 15 to 10 to 15 years, so someone with experience of 10 to 15 years, and then in the end of the career. Again, these are the cases who were caught and punished. So people who made something wrong and left loads of evidence behind. Ranks, it's more likely that careers and non-career civil servants with higher ranks they are more likely to be punished. This surprised me as well. I was expecting the opposite.
Very, very interesting. Finally, Michael Denley asks, can you appeal the decision of the transparency requests? And is it normal to have such requests rejected in Brazil?
Well, it's better now, but I can share my story about this particular research. So when I started my PhD, the CGU gave me this database, and they gave me, I didn't use the Freedom of Information Act. I wrote to the minister and I explained why I wanted the database, and they gave me the social security number of each one of the civil servants. It seems a big deal, but in Brazil with this CPF, the CPF, you cannot do that much. But it was essential to go to the Ministry of Planning to ask the gender, to ask the salary, and to ask when the person started as a civil servant. But even so, but what I did was I had both the civil servant number, personal number, and the social security number. I asked the Minister of Planning based on the civil servant number, and they denied the request, saying we can only give you if you have the social security number, because they thought I didn't have it. And when I appealed, and then I got it because they didn't, I had their answer saying, oh, I need the social security number. You can now, the CGU, the Office of the Comptroller General, they do have a lot of information available online. And there, with what is already available is amazing. You can do loads. But they tend to be very open to researchers. But the transparency request is a struggle. It depends a lot on how you make the request, the words you use. You need to be smart. There are some tips and tricks, but it's improving. You cannot complain about that.
Excellent. Thank you again, Fernanda. We're going to move on now to the next presentation. Featuring Kate Kruger, Norma Reese, and Brett Barrowman, co-presenting from the Center for Global Impact in the United States. Their presentation is Facilitating Reform, Collective Action Problems, and Advocacy Strategy in Anti-Corruption Coalitions in Mexico. So welcome to Kate, Norma, and Brett.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this, and we're really happy to be here. Please ping us on the chat if you have any trouble hearing me or need me to repeat anything. If not, we'll have some discussion at the end. So my name is Kate Kruger. I'm the Senior Evaluation Specialist at IRI, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that supports democracy, human rights, and governance work worldwide. I'm also on the line with Norma, who's our program manager out of our Mexico office, and Brett Barrowman, who is our senior researcher in Washington, DC, where I'm based as well. So the research I'll be presenting to you today is a little bit unique because it's based on an internal evaluation of a democracy and governance assistance program that's actually focused more on the demand side of anti-corruption efforts. And our research was largely inductive, and the sampling was driven in a lot of ways by the parameters set forth by our donor. So in the project that we'll be discussing, IRI supported coalitions made of civil society members, private sector members, and technical experts to advocate for the adoption and implementation of improved state-level anti-corruption laws and policies. So this programming primarily took place in about 2017, between 2016 and 2018. And one thing to note is that we won't actually be sharing the names of the organizations or the specific states where they're working, because their work is still ongoing, even though our direct support as an organization is not. So first I'll start a little bit with the motivation behind our research and some of our research questions. The big things that we wanted to know were how coalitions design institutions to overcome collective action problems. We also wanted to know what the most effective mix of anti-corruption strategies were for a given political context. In addition, we wanted to understand how organizational resource endowments, strategic decisions, and coalition institutions, such as the rules and structures they set up for themselves and the facilitators they use, interact with more external factors, the historical, cultural, and political context, and how those things mix together to affect reform outcomes. We also want to understand how democracy and governance implementing organizations can best support these efforts. For DRG implementers, we always want to be able to make use of cutting edge research on how anti-corruption efforts work, but it's often hard to action some of these findings for the kind of relatively constrained context of an implementer. So we were really aimed on making research that was going to be useful for actual program implementers in the field. Norma, do you want to jump in with a little bit of information about the political context in Mexico at the time? Maybe.
Yes, that time in Mexico in May 2016, the National Council in Mexico passed a set of creating the National Corruption System with Corruption Acts. The national law mandated that each state pass a law creating a state anti-corruption system. So each state has his own system with its own context. In response to that specific political opportunity, the International Republican Institute designed and implemented a United States government foreign assistance program designed to support civic associations in advocacy for anti-corruption reforms under this context I explaining of this anti-corruption system. This project basically focused on advocacy strategies and the creation of the state system and its secondary laws that were needed to have it. And it also has like a geographic scope of 3 different states that were like located in different places of Mexico and have different context, both in the civil society sphere and also in the political parties and political context sphere.
So we can move on to the next slide. So a quick review of our top line findings. Looking across these 3 states and the 3 different coalitions that IRI supported, we found that the most successful anti-corruption civic coalitions did several important things. They identified their comparative advantages based on the organizational resource endowments that they had. They leveraged information, expertise, and their own social networks to influence key decision makers. And they actually presented a credible threat of citizen mobilization beyond the key actors in their relatively small coalitions. For implementers, understanding the factors of success that are endogenous or exogenous to these results is really important because it determines our case selection in the case of external factors and program activities for this in the case of internal factors. So to run through those, some of the endogenous factors that were important, and we will unpack these in a lot more detail in upcoming slides, are having a set of rules and consensus building procedures and facilitated leadership that helped the coalition actually work together to get things done, smoothing over those sort of barriers to collective action. It was also really important that we had a membership that could fulfill diverse technical roles within the coalition, and you weren't working with a bunch of people with the same skill set. The exogenous factors that are worth highlighting are a political opportunity structure that facilitated access to decision makers and a community with an established history of civic engagement. All right, shall we move on to the next slide? All right. Methods. So this is a case study based on an ex post evaluation of a US government foreign assistance program. So that creates a few methodological limitations that I should note. First of all, case selection was dictated by the states in which the program was implemented. In the 3 states where IRI worked, there's enough variation in outcomes to provide a degree of comparative leverage to generate hypotheses for why these things occurred, but it's not perfect. You know, it may be if we had been able to dictate exactly where we were working, it would be slightly different. In this sense, we adopt a rough, most similar systems design, in which cases are similar across a wide range of potential explanatory variables, but they differ on a few of the outcomes. Our data sources included desk review of primary and secondary documents, including state administrative data, local media, organizational documents from the coalition themselves. And then that was supplemented by semi-structured key informant interviews that we conducted in fall of 2019, conducted by a mix of IRI, DC, and Mexico staff. One more limitation that you should note is that in one of the state level coalitions that we studied, due to the relative lack of sustainability of this coalition, we couldn't access many of the members who had originally participated in IRI's program. So for this reason, data on that particular case is limited. Brett, do you want to add anything else about the methods or approach we used for this research?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I'll just add one thing. As sort of Kate noted, there is some structure here. You know, we tried to structure these in a way that would give us some comparative leverage and help us sort of identify factors that were, you know, potentially caused reform outcomes. That said, keep in mind, this is really more of a hypothesis generating exercise than testing, right? So we, you know, we have some models that we think make sense of what went on here, but we're not sort of trying to test those against alternative explanations, although we are open, you know, in the comments or the discussion, you know, if you think there are alternative explanations we should look at, you know, for further research and more rigorous testing, where we would be happy.
Great. All right, let's move on to the next slide, talk about coalition outcomes. So for the purposes of this study, we're defining coalition success along 2 dimensions. One is the results that the coalitions were able to achieve, and the other is the degree to which those results were sustainable, or the coalitions themselves were sustainable. We define results as the degree to which the coalitions reach one or more of their intended goals. Since we're a support organization, our job isn't to set what the anti-corruption agenda should be. It's more to just support civic activists that are working on that agenda. So we don't actually get to define what an important outcome would be. We define sustainability as the degree to which members collaborate outside the purview or time frame of the assistance program that IRI provided, and the degree to which the coalition adopted their strategy or tactics over time to respond to external factors that got in their way. In short, we conceptualize success as the ability for a coalition to achieve their stated goals and their capacity to continue to pursue those goals over time. So you can see in this 2x2 that we found that 2 of the 3 coalitions that IRI supported were actually pretty successful by the standards that we set out, and 1 fell a little bit short in some areas. I'm going to hand it over to Norma to describe this in a little bit more detail.
Yes, as I mentioned, each state should have passed their own laws in order to have complied with the anti-corruption system mandate. In this sense, by the standard we set in the coalition was, we consider it the most successful one. This coalition was able to influence several modifications to their state anti-corruption law and direct public attention to priority anti-corruption issues. It is very important to highlight that the exact language of their recommendations appear in the law, and the coalition suggested language and issues such as selection process for the state anti-corruption prosecutor, the role of the citizen committees in the Anti-Corruption Commission affairs, and more. Many of these recommendations even went above the standards outlined in the national legislation that was intended to serve as a model. So they go beyond the standards. And in the interviews we conduct, several organizations and donors interviewed for validation say directly that these editions will not exist in the legislation if not for the coalition intervention. So that is like the one that we consider the most successful one. Similarly, the coalition to achieve some modifications to the state anti-corruption law, although these recommendations were not adopted to the extent and level of specificity that the state one achieved, The recommendations were included in the law, but there is less evidence to conclude that there was a causal relationship between the coalition recommendations and the composition of the final law. Similarly, as the first one, coalition, this coalition was able to direct public and government attention to priority issues. Finally, the coalition 3 that we have in the graph, we characterized this one as the less successful compared to these standards. In this case, the Central Coalition Facilitator advocated for modifications to the state anti-corruption law, but did not see this recommendation reflect in legislation or regulation, and the coalition never was able to get out as a cohesive group that worked together. These successes were talking about the level of the influence that the coalition have into the laws. Another factor that we consider was external recognition as a coalition of a relevant actor in the public scope. By this second criterion of being recognized by external actors, the 3 coalitions were recognized, of course, with different levels because of what we mentioned. Again, the state one was the most successful of the 3, but it is important to highlight that in the 3 cases, multiple media outlets based in the 3 states cover the work of the coalition in detailed terms, often positioning them as authority figures or group of experts on the topic who had saw over the development or implementation of anti-corruption system. This media coverage also feature coalition recommendations and some of their substantive inputs in layman's terms. In several cases, the media also report the government making promises to a sense and response to this coalition recommendation, further demonstrating the influence they held. In fact, the coalition one, they were even able to achieve this result via the local level and were recognized in national media as an authority on the issues. However, also the 3 state facilitator was able to integrate anti-corruption topics into a broader civic agenda. The 3 states itself was generally not recognized as anti-corruption networks, reform experts. And so that's basically what we observe in terms of successes of the coalitions.
All right, move on to the next slide. So why did this happen? This is the fun part. Thinking about what explains this variation between these different coalitions and then how to apply that to a programming context was our next task. Ultimately, we found a few compelling explanations that are internal to the functioning of the coalitions themselves, and this was the bulk of our research. So there's actually a lot to cover here, but I'm happy to discuss in more detail after our presentation. So I want to highlight a few things that were important to contributing to these outcomes. Coalition institutions. Institutions that help the group overcome collective action problems are really important to the success of these coalitions. We identified several categories of institutions that could account for the differences in outcomes between these different groups. So some of these were the relationship between privileged and latent groups in the coalition, the federalized structure of the coalitions, identity factors, and institutions that help minimize transaction costs. So I want to focus on that last one, actually, with the limited amount of time that we have here today. One of the clearest points of consensus that we found in our study was respondents' emphasis on the importance of a highly structured decision-making process within the coalition. Roles, responsibilities, and processes for consensus building and decision-making were negotiated well in advance, and they were largely respected. This helps to balance the challenge faced by a group of people that actually had a pretty considerable degree of variation in terms of their preferred policy outcomes. They had a very different background in terms of their expertise and interests. There was also near universal consensus among interviewees that the coalitions wouldn't have existed, and they certainly wouldn't have continued without facilitating organizations that kept the group organized and, well, facilitated the process of consensus building. These facilitators were also IRI's entry point into project support, so it was a really important thing for us to research. I also want to talk very briefly about advocacy strategy, referencing the model that you see here in the triangular graphic. We found that the more successful anti-corruption coalitions used what Hari Han describes as lone wolf strategies. They operated as privileged groups with core members that had a unique interest and capacity to provide technical input on legislation, And then they were backed by much larger latent groups of members that had lower levels of engagement. These groups started with a deep dive into the legal context to see what kinds of anti-corruption proposals would be possible, and then made structured interventions to suggest those policy proposals. That said, coalition members were actually really clear with us that lone wolf strategies alone weren't their goal. The public perception of a mobilized mass movement was a really important part of their strategy, if not their specific activities that were supported by IRI. And it was integral to the image of the coalition as an influential mass movement, despite the fact that it was actually staffed by relatively small numbers of people. To be successful, the coalition believed that they had to look like mobilizers while acting like lone wolves by this typology. This finding implies that engaging coalition partners with mobilizing capacity, even if those members aren't particularly engaged at any given part of an intervention, could still exert a really interesting compellence effect on elected officials. Brett or Norma, do you want to jump in on any of this?
I'm good.
Cool.
Me too.
Awesome. So we'll move on to the next slide. So in terms of the external factors that influenced the success of the coalitions, of course, for implementing organizations, we're a lot more interested in internal factors because, as I mentioned before, those are the things that we actually have control over as people developing international assistance interventions. But external factors are obviously incredibly important as well. So some of those factors are as follows. First of all, a history of engagement. For the most successful coalitions, this wasn't the first time that civil society had sort of banded together around an important convening topic. You saw more of this history, this civic history, in the states where we had more successful coalition advocacy. So we believe that there's probably a relationship between those things. Another factor that influenced coalition results was the political environment. We found that this was a unique moment in time where people were actually able to access lawmakers to a higher degree that they probably would have a few years in the past or even a few years in the future. Norma, do you want to weigh in on any of those details? I want to be sensitive to the time, but if there's anything that should be nuanced, please feel free to jump in.
No, in general, well, the fact that we also have like this framework of general mandate of the national law to actually implement was also like something that determined like political opportunity for these groups to work, because there was like this kind of framework. But it's also important to highlight that even this political context exists, like the work that the coalition do in order to assure the quality of the laws and that it's actually reflect the spirit of the national anti-corruption law was the difference that determined the quality of their anti-corruption systems as compared with others.
Great, thank you, Norma. Now we're on to our final slide. Thank you all so much for your time and for us sharing our evaluation research with you. I think a bunch of really interesting little threads that we've sort of discovered and pulled on in this research that we will leave to experts like you guys to conduct more rigorous research on. But if you have any questions, anything that you want to unpack in greater detail, please let us know. We're very happy to discuss.
Very good. Thank you very much, Kate, Norma, and Brett. Very interesting results I think you have there based on these 3 case studies. I don't see any questions just yet in the chat, but I was wondering what you can draw probably from case 3 as far as what does not work. What did case 3 do wrong?
Sure. So I'll pick a topic that's not about the external conditions because I think Norma might know a little bit more about those. But I think one thing that was really relevant in case 3 was the convening power of the coalition facilitator. In state 3, we had a coalition facilitator that was maybe a less experienced organization that had maybe a little bit less trust, buy-in, and convening power with a broader swath of civil society in that state. So I think it was harder to convince people to buy in and keep working, and sort of as soon as they met some degree of political resistance, they didn't really have that ability to create incentives for others to remain engaged in the coalition. Brett or Norma, do you want to weigh in on any other factors that you think were relevant to that less successful case?
No, I think that the thing that Kate mentioned was one of the important ones. Like this coalition even has like a technical capacity and other different characteristics. Maybe they didn't have like that experience of actually go against the power, if you could say so, or threaten the political context in that moment. So of course, when you threaten the political actors, you receive a response. So I think they were they didn't have like enough skills in order to actually react to that threat that comes after the advocacy strategies they were implementing. So that part of having that skill of how to respond in a crisis that was a consequence of one of your strategies, I think also it's very important. That is something that we have to consider, like those kind of soft skills to be able to tackle those challenges that happen around the time life of these kind of projects.
Sort of a follow-up question, because I know you don't want to name the coalitions or I guess the states, but was there a significant difference perhaps in the corruption levels between one state and another in these three cases, or other external factors that may have influenced the success?
Norma, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yes, the political context was like also very relevant. The three different states present like different political context. In the one that has like more successful, it has like more balance in powers in terms of the local executive and the local legislative branch. It was like more power dynamic in which there were like difference or were plurality. In the other ones, even though they didn't have like the same political powers in the government, the political context was like more close in comparison to the first one. So you can see that maybe the executive and the legislative branch was like more cohesive, and there maybe you have like something to consider when seeing this, like also analyze that kind of context, like the power diversity and the alternation. Like also the one that was more successful has a history of how like more alternation in their governments. So the capital and the state government tends to alternate the political parties in comparison to the others, in which maybe there were not the same political parties, but the tenth of having like a Congress of executive branch of similar characteristics were something that was present.
Thank you, Norma. I know two things. One, someone just asked for the email addresses of these presenters, and I did want to point out that IRI is looking for academic researchers that are looking for implementers. And so if you are interested in perhaps hooking up with IRI for research, their email addresses are in the chat. One last excellent question, again from Paul Lunes. He says, context conditions seems critical to explaining success. With regards to maintaining that success, how do you see current conditions mattering? Other presenters have highlighted López Obrador's administration. How has the era of La Cuarta Transformación mattered to this discussion?
Sorry, Norma, I'm giving this one to you too.
I have a thought on this as well. I'll jump in after Norma.
Sure.
Like, it's my personal opinion. I have no like a clear fundamentals to say this. I think it changed a little bit because in the moment that we implemented these advocacy strategies and of course, like the program, the topic of anti-corruption was like a lot in the public agenda because of the scandals that Mexico has in that specific moment. With this new government, the strong agenda that they had in terms of anti-corruption, or at least the discourse terms of in terms of anti-corruption, kind of settle a different context. in which the discussion is not the same one. Like this new government kind of reframe how the anti-corruption issue is being discussed. So I think that changes a lot, like the different outcomes we have seen. Like until like the past election, everything was about the anti-corruption system. We have seen changes on that. Like this new rhetoric about anti-corruption has changed maybe the perspective on how we can address these challenges. But that's my opinion. I'm sure Bonnie and Maria de Los Angeles have like other different opinions, but that's something that I can see in those terms.
Brett?
Yeah, I mean, I'll defer to Kate on the particulars of the case, but Paul, just to respond sort of theoretically or conceptually to the question, again, we're sort of by nature of, what our organization does and the research design, we're sort of interested in subnational variation, right? Why are some coalitions more successful than others in response to the same national levels or political opportunity structure? That said, I think there's a lot of really interesting material to explore on like that nested structure, right? Like what is it about, the structure at the local level or the state level in terms of how elected officials or civil servants respond to cues or opportunities at the national level. The interplay there, I think, is really interesting and could have some important implications for this research question going forward.
I'll just really quickly make a comment because I've worked with a coalition here in Nuevo León State, and so like C1, we were very, very successful at advocating for really good laws, and we're very successful in that stage of the implementation. But what we've seen since then, and this is happening in a lot of states, is that the laws, whether they were passed quickly and unanimously or whether they were passed in an improved form, in most states are being undermined in the implementation phase. And the early success of coalitions or whatever processes have been happening are beginning to become undermined by political processes at the local level. So, and then if you add on the federal level, with the attacks on institutions, that changes the ballgame quite considerably. So thank you very much for a very insightful report. Our final presentation in this session, we have another session starting at 3 o'clock, is Michael Denley from the University of Texas at Austin, speaking on poverty, party alignment, and reducing corruption through modernization, evidence from Guatemala. Let me just make Michael a co-host so he can share his screen. And again, any questions that you may have, please put them in the chat, either in here in the chat in the Zoom, or if you're watching us on YouTube, you can put them in the comment section on YouTube. So thank you very much. And Michael, are you there?
Yes. Can everybody hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, all right. And hope everybody can see my screen now. All right. Thank you so much to everyone, the organizers for organizing this fantastic conference, and thank you to all of you for tuning in here. So today I'm going to talk to you about a project titled Poverty, Party Alignment, and Reducing Corruption Through Modernization, Evidence from Guatemala. And the project is a co-authored project with Akshat Gautam, who is now a research associate at the Kansas City Fed, although we started this project when Akshat was an undergraduate at UT Austin, where I am currently. So just to start things off, just in case you're unfamiliar with some terms, when I'm talking about party alignment, I'm talking about when the political party of a politician at the lower level government, think a mayor, matches the politician at the executive level at the national government, so like the president. So if the mayor has the same party as the president, and then when I'm talking about modernization here, I'm referring to modernization theory. And one of the basic tenets of modernization theory is that when income increases, democracy should increase as well. So why undertake this project? So one of the main ideas in the corruption research literature is that some combination of economics and politics and institutions and how they intermix leads to more corruption. And this is a basic tenet. Most people agree with this. But it's sort of harder to discern what combination of economics and politics and institutions lead to less corruption. And that was one of the basic reasons why we're undertaking this paper. But really figuring this out is actually pretty hard. First of all, as many of you know, corruption is a clandestine behavior. People try to conceal it. And as a result, people have been using measurement techniques that have involved perceptions indicators for many years. Yet we know the problems with these perception indicators. There's many articles on the issues with perceptions indicators. So one of the goals of our project was to measure corruption a little bit more objectively. And another sort of measurement challenge with corruption, really getting at this relationship about which combination of economics and politics / institutions leads to less corruption, is that corruption is one of these phenomena where there's lots of reverse causality and endogeneity. So the prototypical example is that when corruption increases, usually the quality of democracy decreases. But when corruption reduces, usually the quality of democracy increases. So we have to deal with this endogenous reverse causal relationship whenever we're investigating corruption. And some of the most famous work that's really been able to draw causal inferences and get around these challenges that I've mentioned is the work using the randomized audits in Brazil, in particular from Claudio Ferraz and Federico Finan. But in this project, we really wanted to figure out what happens in the rest of the world where you don't have randomized audits, and how can you make causal inferences in these types of situations. So there's four elements from the literature that are going to lead us to our theory here. So the first is that when poverty is reduced, that usually causes citizens to discount clientelistic benefits as with respect to more programmatic policy-based benefits. And basically, as poverty reduces, people are going to be less reliant on that extra income from the corrupt politician who can maybe offer them a patronage job or some sort of vote buying arrangement. But yeah, as poverty reduces, that the literature has pretty convincingly shown that clientelism is no longer as relevant. In terms of party alignment, and again, party alignment is this relationship when, for instance, the mayor has the same political party as the president. It both leads those parties to have more resources. So there's a massive literature on political budget cycles. And this phenomenon of aligned parties having more resources is not just in some developed countries, but it's also been systematically shown to be the case in developed countries as well. But even though alignment leads to more resources for these incumbent parties, it also leads to more clarity of responsibility. And by clarity of responsibility, I mean that when, for instance, the mayor has the same political party as the president, it becomes really clear to the voters, well, who is actually responsible for all the good things that are happening to me in government and all of the bad things. But when there isn't this party alignment relationship that facilitates clarity of responsibility, then it's sort of the politicians can engage in a blame game and say, oh, well, I couldn't get this done because the national party was in the way, or maybe the national party then would try to come into the next election and say, hey, this mayor, like, he couldn't get things done. And it creates a very difficult informational environment for the voter. And then finally, the fourth part of the literature that's really motivating our theory is that elections generally lead politicians to control their bad behavior a bit more. And here I've cited Barrow and Farrar-John, but there's been plenty of more recent work that uses causal inference to be able to discern these relationships. So how do we put this all together? So the way that we figure that all of these things mesh together in terms of corruption per se is alignment, and so the combination of alignment, reducing poverty, and having a close election in the last election are what leads local politicians to reduce their corruption levels. And in the paper, we have a game theoretical model that explores all of these mechanisms very deeply. But I'll give you a graphic presentation of the theory here. So we know that from this clientelism literature, voters are going to discount the benefits of vote buying or patronage jobs. So basically the benefits that a corrupt politician can bring once poverty has reduced. So that's what this proposition 1 is all about. It's about this different discount rate that poverty is inducing. But you can see here that, so I guess I should explain. So on the right-hand side of the graph is the margin of victory for the aligned mayors. So the mayors who have the same party as the president think, and then on the left-hand side of the graph, you have the margin of victory for the unaligned mayors, so the opposition party mayors. And close to the 0 point right here is where the elections are close, and it's the same on both sides. And as you move further away from this 0 point is where the local level politician won with a greater margin of victory. And you can see here that when the politician is aligned, so on the right-hand side of the graph here, it's very clear to the voters who is responsible for what's happening in terms of the corruption outcomes. But it's a little bit less clear on this side when the opposition mayor is from an unaligned party. But this really interacts with this poverty reduction here. So basically what we can show in our formal model, and there's a link to the paper at the bottom, is that when poverty increases, you don't have this same jump that we had in the previous screen. So you don't have the same reduction in corruption activity. On the right-hand side here, the aligned parties are going to take advantages of their resource advantages to distribute more rents, and the voters aren't going to sort of punish them as much, which in turn affects their behavior. So we test this theory that we advance here in Guatemala. And Guatemala is a very interesting country for our case, not just because there are no randomized audits, but because poverty is very much a concern in Guatemala. According to the latest data from the World Bank, 59% of the people in Guatemala are below the poverty rate. And in our case, we measure the poverty levels at the municipal level according to census level data. And the way things work in most of the world is that poverty is usually measured at the municipal level, most censuses, but not every year. So another reason that Guatemala is very interesting from this perspective is, so on the right here, I have a sign saying Gracias CICIG, and CICIG was the UN-backed anti-corruption body, which was recently expelled from the country after they started to investigate President Jimmy Morales and his family. So corruption is very much a part of political discourse in Guatemala and very central to what's happening there. So from an institutional perspective, Guatemala's governors of departments, which is akin to a state or a province, are appointed by the president from that same party. So from a causal inference perspective, we can make direct associations between the alignment of the mayor and the president without getting confounded by this middle level variable about the government, about the department level governors, political parties. And then really one of the final reasons and really important reasons we choose Guatemala as well is that the independence of its Contraloría is protected by the Constitution, and the Contraloría reports to the Congress, not the president. So in turn, our alignment relationship that we're trying to investigate is sort of preserved. And we also test for potential political bias in the audit distribution about who gets audited, and we find that there is no bias. And also crucially, Guatemala does publish their audit data online. And that's really crucial because that doesn't happen in all the countries, particularly in the region. So in terms of a method, I'm using a close election regression discontinuity design. And a close election regression discontinuity design is a form of a quasi-experimental design that aims to mimic a randomized experiment. And it does so pretty well for close elections in particular. And the idea underpinning this is that when elections are decided by a small margin, they are as good as random. And the way that we do this is we use an algorithm to figure out which elections are close, so that we don't just pick, say, 5% or 10% margin of victory. We let the algorithm decide based on our data. And for the dependent variables, we're looking at the number of municipal audit infractions in each municipality year and the log amounts of misspent money associated with those infractions. And we're looking at the years 2010 to 2015. The main treatment variable, again, is the alignment. So whether the mayor's party matches the president's party, and the running variable that's governing that alignment relationship is the mayor's margin of victory. So in terms of the main results, we do find some support for our theory that once poverty has reduced since the last census, we do find that alignment is reducing corruption, but only when there is a close election. So here you can see the patterns a little bit more clearly. So our dependent variable, again, is the number of infractions committed in each municipality year. On the right-hand side of the 0 point is the margin of victory for the aligned parties. And on the left-hand side is the margin of victory for the unaligned parties. And you can see here for this poverty-reducing sample that when the mayor only won the last election by a close margin, there's a significant reduction in the corruption activity relative to the unaligned mayors. However, as you move further away from the this cutoff point where the mayor just barely won, then things tend to even out on both sides of the curve. So there's really something happening with whether the mayor just barely won or just barely lost. And that also really helps us from a causal inference perspective as well. However, when you look at the whole sample here, so if you look at the not just the municipalities in which poverty reduced from one census to the next, and we should add that we measure this before the actual term takes place, so as to prevent endogeneity concerns, then you're not really finding this same relationship. So basically, declarative responsibility by itself is not enough to reduce corruption in a country like Guatemala, where poverty is definitely an issue. So we find the same basic results when we're looking at the amount of misappropriated money spent that's associated with those infractions as well. You can see a jump right here on near the cutoff in terms of less corruption when the aligned mayor just barely won relative to the unaligned mayor. And again, that's being fueled by this declarative responsibility that the mayor's party matches the president's party, and it's much easier for the voters to discern, well, who's responsible. So the mayor is in turn then updating and behaving a little bit better in terms of corruption. However, as the margin of victory increases for the aligned mayor, you can see that there's much more sort of misappropriated money as you move further away from the cutoff. So in the paper, we have a number of different robustness tests. And I think sort of most notably, we find the exact same result, although the coefficient size is a little bit weaker for when we look at changes in extreme poverty as well. But yeah, there are many different models that we test in the paper, different models by year, by electoral term. We have density tests. We test for potential endogeneity between poverty and corruption. Many more things that I don't have time to really get into now, but I can definitely revisit in the Q&A. So what do we try to take away from our research? So there's a really famous paper published by Darren Acemoglu and colleagues that shows that economic growth doesn't lead to democracy, and some researchers at MIT have recently replicated it and used even more sophisticated methods and found even a stronger relationship. But what we can show in this case is that the combination of reducing poverty, party alignment, and the last election for that mayor being decided by a close margin is what leads to a reduction in corruption activity. And as we know from a nice paper by our keynote speaker, Paul Lunes, as the levels of corruption decrease, generally you're going to have a better quality of democracy. So to relate this back to modernization theory, maybe the reduction of corruption is acting as a mediator in terms of how economic growth and poverty reduction lead to democracy, better democracy. We should note a limitation. So because this municipal level poverty is only measured at each census basically every 10 years, we aren't able to, we have to use subgroup analyses. So what that allows us to do is make inferences regarding the different paths about the poverty reducing municipalities and the poverty increasing, or sort of the whole sample. But because regression discontinuity designs can't incorporate subgroup analysis yet, we have to be honest about the limitations there, and that our conclusions mainly pertain to sampling and external validity, as opposed to full internal validity for the whole sample. Although, to be clear, because we are using that regression discontinuity design, and we've done all sorts of related to tests to ensure that there's no endogeneity or reverse causality going on, we can make sort of different predictions about poverty reducing sample having different corruption paths when the mayor is aligned and there's a close election. So a scope condition for this argument here is that there needs to be party system stability. So here I have a picture of Jimmy Morales. As many of you know, he came from an outsider party, and currently there are actually no mayorships in Guatemala, or at least during his term here, that have an alignment relationship. So we can only really test this hypothesis once there's an alignment relationship. But very interestingly, when you look to see what happened during his term, where you don't have any alignment relationships anymore, the number of corrupt infractions goes up quite significantly, and that log, or I guess the log amount doesn't go up as much, but the average number of average amount of money expropriated per infraction goes up quite significantly as well. So alignment does fuel some sort of clarity responsibility, but we're trying to show the conditions under which that relationship is strongest. So yeah, I'll and thank you very much. And yeah, you can all access the working paper on my website there, and definitely welcome your comments. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Looking for questions. Is there anyone that has questions for Mike? Go ahead. Let's see. Is there re-election at the mayoral level in Guatemala?
Yes, and one of the tests that we run is we use the new algorithm from Cataneo and co-authors to incorporate the influence of covariates into the regression discontinuity design. And we control for the re-election of the mayors when we incorporate re-election in these sort of more advanced specifications. So yeah, definitely re-election is a factor, and yeah, we control for it.
Very good. I was wondering, and it would be something maybe difficult to test for, and I'm sort of coming at this with my own Mexican perspective. The concept of alignment. Now you're saying that it's a matter of mayors and maybe in Mexico it would be governors who are aligned with the president have to behave because everybody knows that it's that party that's responsible all the way up and down. And I'm wondering if maybe there's also a sense of loyalty and hierarchical mandates saying, listen, you know, you've got to get in line because your election was really close and we don't want to lose that election next time. So maybe is it a matter of party loyalty and the president being able to tell the politicians at various levels how to behave?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely right, and it's part of this clarity of responsibility argument that maybe there is pressure at the higher level, and that's maybe one of the reasons why the mayors, when they're aligned and particularly after poverty reduced and they only won the last election by a small margin, then yeah, they would sort of improve their behavior a little bit. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting if we could somehow get some qualitative work to be able to get confirmation along the lines of what you're suggesting there. But yeah, I think it might be a little difficult, but yeah.
Thank you. So there was another question here from Nicolas Lagos. He says, very interesting, thanks. Could you please explain how did you demonstrate that the Supreme Audit Institution didn't have political bias in their audits? This is a very important element to improve public trust in this kind of institutions.
Yeah, so great question there. So what we did is we ran a regression discontinuity design, again, figuring out whether party alignment was predicting who would get audited in a given year. So in Guatemala, most of the time, I think around 300 out of the 340 municipalities were getting audited in most years. So there was sort of a little bit of a gap in terms of, well, maybe they could be targeting the opposition party, etc. But yeah, we thoroughly tested that with a regression discontinuity design, and yeah, the results come up very much insignificant. So yeah, we can sort of rule out this this unfairness in the distribution of audits, about who gets audited.
Paul Lunes has a follow-up question to the previous question. It says, so the effect uncovered via your identification strategy is true for first-term mayors, but not necessarily for second-term mayors. Is this correct? Also, have you considered extending this research to other national contexts?
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't looked at the actual term of the mayor. We just sort of code a dummy variable about whether the mayor is reelected or not. But yeah, it's a little bit difficult, I would say, from a data perspective, given that, as I mentioned there, Jimmy Morales' election basically made it such that there were no alignment relationships for the last political term. So we would be running into sample size issues. And yeah, actually, I'm planning to run similar research in Mexico and India as well. Oh, and in Honduras too. So for my dissertation, I've been collecting audit data for the past 5 years. So yeah, thankfully I've had some support from the undergrads at our research institute, Innovations for Peace and Development, and particularly because I'm at UT Austin, there's a lot of Spanish speakers, and we're able to read through the audit reports and code them one by one, infraction by infraction. So yeah, it's a little bit of a tedious process, but in order to have objective corruption data, I mean, I just don't see another way around it. So because otherwise then we have to divert back to the perceptions indicators, which really have a host of problems associated with them. So yeah.
Very good, thank you. A question from Norma Ruiz, who just presented. She asks, in Guatemala, does the election of mayors coincide with presidential elections? And in which proportion? More or less than 50%. So I'm guessing temporarily.
Yes, the answer is yes. So yeah, general elections.
All of the mayoral elections coincide with the president?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Very good. All right. Looks like that's all of the questions for Mike Denley. And so thank you very much for that presentation. And that is the close of this session on corruption and public administration. I want to take a moment again to thank all of you for being with us. We have presenters and attendees scattered across the globe. And just in this one session, we had one from Italy, one from the UK, and two from the United States. We are broadcasting live on YouTube, and we're taking your comments and your questions in the chat here on Zoom or in the comments section on YouTube. So the next session has a theme, criminal justice in the Americas. And we have here speakers from Brazil and Argentina. So we will begin with Ligia Madeira, who I am making co-host now. Ligia's presentation will be, as I understand, in English. She is from Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul. I am butchering that, I'm sorry. And her speech is on judicial policy diffusion, a model to analyze specialized state courts fighting organized crime in Brazil. Ligia. Ligia Madeira. Ligia, are you there? All right, is Vicente Monteverde with us? Ligia or Vicente? Let's take a 5-minute break while I find out where these people are. Be back in a moment. Right, excuse that technical difficulty. I think we have Ligia with us now. Ligia? Oh no, she seems to be having trouble with her computer somehow. I see you. I see you, Ligia. Okay, but you're having trouble with your microphone. Can you set up your telephone to use as a microphone? Try dialing in with your telephone. Oh,
Could you listen to me now?
yes.
Ah, okay.
Excellent. Okay, so
Let me.
okay, I will just introduce you again. Then this session is on criminal justice in the Americas. We have one presentation in English and one in Spanish. Our first presentation is from Ligia Madeira, Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. Sorry about that. And she's speaking on judicial policy diffusion, a model to analyze specialized state courts fighting organized crime in Brazil. Welcome, Ligia.
Oh, thank you. Let me just try to share my presentation. Could you see?
Yes, it's not in full screen mode yet.
Yeah, I will put. Okay, I'm so sorry about this technical problems. This is a paper about judicial policy diffusion, and is part of a broad investigation about judicial institutional development in Brazil and judicial public policies to fight corruption. And we are working in 3 branches. The first one, analyzing specialized courts in the global south, comparing Brazil and Indonesia, analyzing the institutional development of the federal justice in Brazil and the creation of the specialized courts. And here we are looking to the judicial specialization process of state courts, focused on fighting organized crime in the Brazilian states. Well, we perform qualitative analysis as a method, analyzing legal norms and role of entrepreneurs, agents, and the political institutional context, the criminal conjuncture of the states, and the motivations to adopt the policy. And we are performing document analysis and content analysis, conducting interviews with these actors, these judicial actors. We also, oh my God, now I could. And in terms of theoretical references, we are working with 3 big concepts. The first one is judicial policy, the court's action in formulating and implementing public policies. Judicial policy is the action of the courts, public policies, and their central role in the policy making, considering the judge's values, the public policy intended scope and impact, and the decision's legal and constitutional content. Specialized courts as another concept. Specialized courts deal with a limited number of judges and a short variety of cases, and they are built by interest groups to build expertise, and they change the institutional hierarchy between lower courts and high courts and supreme courts. And this is well known in the Lava Jato case and the specialized court of Curitiba here in the south. The specialized criminal courts are common in the last decades, also in progressive eras, where we have domestic violence courts, childhood and adolescence courts, indigenous peoples courts, and now in a more severe and punitive approach, courts problem solving. That's this anti-corruption organized is an example. Well, these courts are built by exogenous actions by the judiciary or by the other government branches, and they have the characteristics of independence with big political interference, interinstitutional and international cooperation, recruitment and specialization, and they have also a research role. And many researchers are discussing the durability in terms of financial and political support. This occurs in Brazil, this occurs in Indonesia. Well, the third concept is policy diffusion. We are interested in to know how anti-corruption policies result in similar institutional designs that replicate through justice systems in Brazil and outside of Brazil. And diffusion adopts mechanisms such emulation, social learning, and top-down coercion, political competition. The policies led by bureaucracies are carried out by actors who share beliefs about institutional roles, associating with a mission on institutional development, and is a product of social learning that includes the process of policy adherence, development, and change. And this process by which policy choices in one unit influence other units is our big interest. Specifically about our theme, we are concerned about money laundering and organized crime in Brazil. That Brazil is involved in terms of commitment with international organizations regarding an agenda of fighting corruption, and is very, very important the role of the federal judicial bureaucracies to build this scenario. Well, here we are calling the Brazilian experience of combating corruption from the justice system, and we have a timeline. Since the end of the 90s, we start having a money laundering law, and after that, an electoral corruption law, and this in parliament. And after that, the federal judiciary starts some research groups, some researchers to deal with this new legislation, and it starts the process of specializing the federal courts. After that, the Ministry of Justice starts a big national public policy to deal with corruption, calls ANCLA, National Strategy to Combat Corruption and Money Laundering. And after that, the process of specialized, not just the federal justice, but the federal public ministry and the specialized the federal police, together with new laws that comprehend the big whole, the big net of anti-corruption in Brazil. A new money laundering, the Ficha Limpas law, an anti-corruption law, a criminal organization law, and well, in Brazil, the specialized courts are created from the same reasons as anti-corruption agencies, well known, insulate corruption cases from existing corrupt system and build expertise to cope these complex cases. And in Brazil is a policy evolved from the federal judiciary's initiative based on this process of mobilization of his bureaucracy in a conception of how this policy should be implemented. The car wash operation gave nationwide visibility, highlighting the policy of these criminal courts. And we have this the scenario of the federal courts to deal with money laundering. We have 5 federal intermediate courts, and we have at least 1 court in each of the most prominent capitals in the Brazil, in the regions, and we have many of them in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Paraná, and Curitiba, and Pernambuco. Well, then we are trying to develop a model to analyze specialized state courts, in this case of the paper. We adopt a model with 2-dimensional approach to address policy diffusion, combining views of mechanisms that influence the dissemination of the policy and the analysis of actors and the context of the mobilization. We have a first dimension looking to the mechanism of the diffusion in terms of learning, is a model-based bureaucracy and bureaucratic expertise, and a model of emulation that replicates a particular policy adopted by other governments and institutions. And a second dimension focuses on the actors involved in the policy, or adopting the policy of a specialized court related to the profile and the role of the makers in policy design. We can see endogenous process when courts build his policies, or exogenous, where outside the bureaucracy of the judiciary, we have executive and legislative branches involved. And in this case, we have or creation of new courts or reorganization of existing ones. Here is the model. We can see that there is a normative that are involved in the process of the first dimension, and we have the social learning and emulation, and in the second dimension we have the actors, the exogenous and the endogenous actors. Well, we can see 3 diffusion patterns. The first one, we have courts resolutions that invite the other courts, the state court, to specialize. The second one, by initiative of the legislative or executive branch, we have the specialization. And the third one, we have the creation and use of existing courts. Well, in the case of the state courts in Brazil, we have a process that the specialization policy entrepreneurs in the federal courts mobilized actors and agents to create recommendations that promote the process of diffusion to the states. And as a result, we have positive effects, and we have the spread around the country. Now we have 13 Brazilian states with specialized courts dealing with organized crime. We can see that we have half of the states, this process were built by exogenous actors, by complementary law, and the other half by resolutions inside the judiciary. And here we can see that we have mentions of the resolution of the National Justice Council by 3 states, and mention other specialized state courts by the other states. Well, here we can see the waves of the diffusion from this federal model to state, this federal model to fight corruption, political corruption, civil servant corruption, to other patterns that fight organized crime, factions and criminal dealing with drugs. The first wave starts in the north and northeast and is a model of the diffusion through the recommendation of the CNJ. The second wave emulate some experience, especially the experience of the Court of Alagoas, and starts to deal with the organized crime. And after that, and in this moment, we have a specific law to deal with the criminal organization in 2013. The third wave is built to deal with the political corruption, and we have the diffusion to other states, Santa Catarina, Goiás, and the fourth wave is is after the Lava Jato visibility. We have much more states emulate and create his own state criminal courts. This is just a exploratory research. We are looking for new waves of diffusion. We are looking for the particularities of organized crime in each of the states, and I am open, and it will be a pleasure to share and ask for questions and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ligia.
Thank you.
Sharing screen. There we go. Let me see if there are questions here. No questions so far. Give a few minutes to ask whatever questions there may be. But this was it. I was interested in the specialization policy entrepreneurs, and I thought it maybe linked in with the talk that Kate, Norma, and Brett gave us on coalitions in shaping in Mexico the local laws. And so, but it sounds like the specialization policy entrepreneurs were actually motivating coalitions or other actors to pressure for change. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It's we have the two process: coalitions, specialized, and after that, more coalitions.
Okay, but so it's a it is a multiple process. And another thing is we can see here that these are laws that were passed 20 some odd years ago, some of them, right? But there are results that we see in the long term. Is that your interpretation as well?
Yes, yes. Especially in the state court, we have some results to deal with the groups, the prison groups that are involved in high violent criminal acts, and this is very important.
So a lot of politicians, especially where there is no re-election, are focused on short-term results and maybe don't have the same incentives to pass laws that will give us results in 10, 15, 20 years, right? And that's maybe a problem that with a lot of democracies in particular, especially those that don't have re-election, because we have the short political horizon, right? But Brazil has done, in my opinion, a lot of things right, and I think that a lot of what you've just mentioned is part of what Brazil has done right. A lot of people interpret the recent corruption scandals as evidence that Brazil is in bad shape. Would you think so?
Yeah, I think we increase, but now we are in not so good situation. We need to care to continue.
Yes, it requires persistence, definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't let your guard down.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, there are some disturbing events happening in Brazil right now anyway.
Yeah.
But I think it's part of a global wave of politicians being elected on anti-corruption platforms and then attacking the institutions. Okay, good. You've taken care of that question about your email, so that's great. Anyone that wants more information on this presentation can contact Ligia directly. And again, we will be asking each presenter for permission to share either the paper or the slides, and we will put those on our website. Vamos a pedir permiso de cada uno de los expositores para colocar sus estudios en nuestro sitio web. Thank you very much, Ligia. Our last presenter today is Vicente Monteverde, who I see now. Let me just make you a co-host, Vicente. Yes. Vicente Monteverde comes to us from Universidad de Morón in Argentina, and speaking on corrupt economy, theory of corrupt phenomena. So we have 20 minutes. Vicente, please, again, any questions, put them in the chat here in Zoom or in the YouTube comments.
¿Se ve bien?
Se ve, pero no estás proyectando todavía.
Allí.
Ahí en el PowerPoint.
Sí.
Hay un icono para proyectar acá abajo.
Ahí está, sí. Ahí.
Abajo a mano derecha.
Allí.
Ya está.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Bonnie. Muchas gracias a los colegas desde aquí de Argentina. Gracias por incluirme en el tema de Criminal Justice. Esta es una teoría de fenómenos corruptivos. Disculpen, iba a ser la exposición en inglés, pero bueno, por confusión la hago en español, pero aquí tengo, esto se refiere a dos trabajos, uno en la revista Transparencia Internacional España y otro en el Journal of Financial Crime. El que lo quiere, lo solicita, se lo puedo enviar por mail. Mi mail es monteverdevicente@hotmail.com. ¿A qué me refiero? Y ustedes saben, los corruptólogos, o todos los que estamos en el tema de corrupción, ¿a qué se refiere esto? Yo elaboré esta teoría en base a la gestión de un gobierno entero, la gestión del último gobierno argentino del 15 al 19, y ¿en qué me baso con llamar fenómeno corruptivo? En que nosotros siempre estamos, y a través de todos los programas de integridad y de compliance, ya sea de compliance para el sector público, el sector privado, definimos los actos de corrupción, analizamos estos y definimos sus elementos, pero también las herramientas para combatirlos, tenemos que tener en cuenta que el delito muta, el narcotráfico muta y la corrupción también muta. Entonces, a lo mejor hay que empezar a analizar herramientas nuevas para fenómenos nuevos. Y aquí ya sabemos, cuando definimos acto de corrupción, el corruptor, el corrupto, el pago, la obligación de hacer, la corrupción activa, la corrupción pasiva. Pero yo me detengo un poco en el impacto social, el impacto psicológico, sociológico, la cultura de la corrupción, los patrones de corrupción y el arte de la corrupción. Siendo argentino, ustedes lo pueden saber por las noticias que tienen los periódicos, que aquí un máster en corrupción se lo pueden hacer en el sentido práctico. Estamos en un contexto de pandemia y sabemos que cuando todos los actos del Estado y todo lo que es la gestión estatal, ya sea con gestión pública y privada, allí siempre hay unos, a través de esa gestión hay decisiones discrecionales. Hace 30 días o 15 días, en Argentina hubo dos fenómenos, dos actos de corrupción muy claros, uno del gobierno nacional que no se llevó a cabo y uno del gobierno provincial de la ciudad de Buenos Aires en compras, uno en compra de alimentos y otro en compra de barbijos. Entonces, lo que tenemos que tener en cuenta es que esta teoría, yo puedo tener corrupción en un Estado de Derecho, en una distribución inequitativa de las rentas, a través de favorecer a grupos de presión o grupos de interés. Y en ese mar de decisiones discrecionales, yo puedo, en base a estructuras legales, normativas, leyes, yo puedo distribuir renta inequitativamente. Entonces, una decisión discrecional produce una distribución de rentas, inequitativa, por supuesto. Entonces, la asignación de un contrato, la asignación de un comprador, siempre esto puede estar dado en base a la legalidad. Esto es muy peligroso porque ¿qué herramienta utilizo para combatir esto? Ustedes me van a decir, ¿no está legislado? No. Estos son, digamos, decisiones nuevas porque también hay una mutación del sistema corruptivo en todos estos fenómenos. Tenemos que tener en cuenta, ¿por qué lo llamo fenómeno corruptivo? Porque el acto de corrupción está legislado. Entonces, esto es muy difícil de percibir, de determinar. La frontera es muy corta, no se percibe, pero sí distribuye rentas de manera desequilibrada. Entonces, yo puedo tener una estructura normativa, puedo tener un Estado de Derecho, un conjunto de leyes y reglamentos que normativizan. Yo puedo tener también un código de ética en las empresas, un plan de integridad, pero puedo tener también decisiones discrecionales. Esto me van a llevar a distribuir rentas. Puedo tener un equilibrio económico, puedo tener una estructura ética, pero estas rentas funcionan y funcionan en base a la distribución. Nosotros sabemos el Estado de Derecho, la exposición de Ligia anterior habla de las cortes y yo tengo un trabajo de análisis del Estado judicial de la corrupción en la Argentina y sabemos que vamos tendiendo por movimientos internacionales y por los estudios a cortes específicas anticorrupción. Sabemos que la cuestión de la corrupción es muy difícil de investigar, es muy difícil de probar, y del momento de realizarse el acto de corrupción, al momento de sancionar al corrupto, hay una gran cantidad de tiempo, y el tiempo desaja las situaciones, las mella, las lastima, y es probable que el corrupto salga con pocos años y hasta no devolviendo el dinero. Entonces, especialmente en estas zonas en Latinoamérica, donde tenemos ahí algunas cuestiones de corrupción sistémica. No nos olvidemos que nosotros no tenemos un nivel de gobierno en todos los países, tenemos 3 niveles por lo menos. El Estado nacional, el Estado provincial o estadual y el Estado municipal. Entonces tenemos 3 gestiones de decisiones que ahí mezcladas pueden ser discrecionales. Puedo tener un conjunto de leyes y reglamentos, puedo exigir que las empresas que yo esté tratando tengan un fenómeno, tengan un plan de integridad, pero yendo a la práctica y realmente a la trinchera de la corrupción, el acto de corrupción de hace un mes que el gobierno nacional no lo logró no lo logró finalizar, porque no se pagaron las mercaderías, compró alimentos a empresas intermediarias, no a los fabricantes de estos alimentos. Entonces, cuando nosotros buscamos allí, en esas decisiones discrecionales, tenemos mucho humo y muchas decisiones sobre la marcha que pueden generar distribución de rentas. El tema de servicios públicos, el tema de precios y servicios. Tenemos un equilibrio, bueno, hoy estamos atrás de una pandemia, entonces la cuestión de la pandemia hace que yo tenga que tomar decisiones muy rápidas, muy veloces, pero dentro de esas decisiones veloces y rápidas, también la corrupción es una pandemia. Entonces, tenemos que sigue estando. Entonces, ese virus de corrupción puede instalarse en esas decisiones discrecionales que por apuro, por salud o por razones políticas tomen los gobiernos de todos estos niveles. Puedo tener una estructura ética, puedo tener códigos de ética en las empresas públicas, puedo tener... en la Argentina, el año pasado, hace 2 años, salió una legislación sobre el gobierno corporativo de empresas públicas. Sí, el código de ética han publicado ellos, pero no han publicado mapas de riesgo. Entonces, yo no conozco cuál es el estado de los riesgos de corrupción en esas empresas. ¿Y por qué? Porque hay un delito de enriquecimiento ilícito, que es difícil de probar, y hay que controlar las declaraciones juradas de los funcionarios permanentes, pero no controlarlas al fin, controlarlas como se van generando. Entonces, puedo tener una estructura ética y dentro de esta estructura ética generar distribuciones de rentas. También el tema de distribución de renta, cuando yo apruebo un aumento de una empresa privada, per se distribuyo. ¿Puede ser equitativo? No lo sé. Entonces, aquí las decisiones discrecionales distribuyen renta en per se. Sabemos que dentro de la teoría democrática, la democracia, ¿qué implica? La democracia es un equilibrio de intereses de los grupos. El Estado hace el equilibrio. ¿Para qué? Para que esos intereses de los grupos o de grupos de interés o grupos de presión sean equilibrados, se equilibren con los intereses de la sociedad. Esta es la cuestión. La teoría se basa también en la distribución de rentas, o sea, en el coeficiente de Gini, la línea de distribución. Se basa también en el enfoque de rent-seeking, o sea, en la búsqueda de rentas. ¿Qué es? Del punto de vista de la corrupción, sabemos que la búsqueda de rentas es salgo a cazar en el zoológico rentas que sé que el Estado lo tiene y me puede facilitar. Entonces, esa búsqueda de rentas implica que yo esté permanentemente en todas las transacciones, sean de obra pública, de compras, todos los contratos de acciones de no hacer, todo lo que salgo a cazar esas rentas y yo las tengo allí a las manos. Entonces, más discrecionalidad, más distribución equitativa. La teoría de la búsqueda de rentas no alcanza a explicar todo este portento corruptivo. Explica una parte. Otra de las cosas es las relaciones económico-público-privadas, sean los contratos, servicios públicos, relaciones económicas públicas per se, o relaciones, o sea, yo puedo participar en un mercado y tomar una decisión discrecional y trasladar renta, inequitativamente, por supuesto. Entonces, la hipótesis de los fenómenos corruptivos es en un país con un Estado de Derecho, un equilibrio económico y con una estructura ética, tener una distribución de rentas se equilibra a través de decisiones discrecionales y provocar fenómenos corruptivos. O sea, no provoca un acto de corrupción, provoca un fenómeno corruptivo. Lo denominé de esta forma porque creo que es la mejor forma de denominar algo que no está legislado, pero que en todas las sociedades ocurre y que va a haber que empezar a utilizar herramientas para prever estos fenómenos. No es abuso de poder, porque esto está dentro de la legislación, sino son decisiones. Entonces, habrá que tomar alerta porque esto pertenece a la mutación del delito de la corrupción. Entonces, tenemos que también tener en cuenta que a la mutación del delito y a la mutación del acto de corrupción también hay que mutar las herramientas. Como también tenemos que empezar a ver la aplicación del blockchain o la aplicación de la inteligencia artificial para ver el tema de control de operaciones del Estado. Entonces, a lo mejor tenemos que comenzar a empezar a trabajar en estas herramientas, llevarlas a los congresos y discutirlas, porque es la única manera de combatir esta pandemia que es la corrupción, ¿no? Por eso, no son todos actos de corrupción en sí mismos, sino son transferencias de rentas a sectores discrecionales, donde hay ciertos sectores que transfieren rentas a otros y se quedan con una porción de la población. Esto es un tema bastante imperceptible y peligroso, pero siempre es a favor de grupos de presión, de grupos de interés o el mismo Estado. Aquí les doy un ejemplo de estas decisiones de privatizaciones, decisiones de afectación de contratos públicos, decisiones de precios de servicios públicos. Un ejemplo, cada vez que asume un gobierno de color político diferente, empieza a mover las olas de decisiones discrecionales para un lado y para el otro. En un gobierno anterior asumió y consiguió una indemnización que el Estado le pagó a una empresa a la cual era socio el presidente. Entonces, cuidado con estas cosas. Después se sancionó la legislación de conflictos de intereses, sí, bueno, pero después que ya cobré y el fenómeno ocurrió. Está dentro de la legislación, pero es una ventaja. Entonces, obtención de ventajas sobre multas, plazos, decisiones de autorización de precios del sector privado, decisiones de cálculo de pensiones o jubilaciones, muchas veces cuando hay crisis, especialmente en la Argentina, que tenemos crisis recurrentes y permanentes, hay decisiones de cálculo de jubilaciones en menos del pensionado que tiene el derecho a cobrar. Eso también es una distribución de rentas a favor del mismo Estado. Traslación de impuestos. Hemos tenido resoluciones de traslación de impuestos en ciertos sectores a la sociedad. Esto fue real. Después se deroga, pero la intención está. Entonces, cuidado con esto, con este fenómeno de transferencias de rentas. Yo creo que si tenemos que avanzar en herramientas anticorrupción, participado en los trabajos anteriores, fueron muy interesantes, los felicito a todos los exponentes, y ver que tendríamos que utilizar herramientas nuevas, porque los fenómenos son nuevos, especialmente en este contexto. Y un mensaje, hagamos algo todos los días, porque hay que luchar con estos flagelos que tiene que ver con nuestras generaciones futuras. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Vicente. El chat. Preguntas.
Si tienen preguntas, aquí.
Estás hablando de tanto las instituciones, el Estado de Derecho, pero también de valores y de cultura. Dentro de tu teoría, ¿cuál de estos tiene más importancia? ¿O será que se requiere un equilibrio entre ellos?
No, yo creo que se requiere un equilibrio entre esos elementos. El tema es el siguiente. Hay varias teorías sobre la corrupción. Hay una teoría de cultura, una teoría de desarrollo, una teoría de pobreza. El tema de cultura es un tema que fuerza mucho. Nosotros en nuestro país tenemos antecedentes de que éramos un puerto de contrabandistas, y eso no pudimos deshacernos de eso, y recibimos ese factor. Entonces, sistémicamente se va trasladando a través de los gobiernos. Pero yo creo que tiene que ser un equilibrio, pero está en los trabajos que ustedes, yo después pueden consultar los trabajos publicados, está fundamentado todo esto en decisiones de gobierno.
Tenemos otra pregunta de Tomás Salcedo Albert. Dice, de manera muy general, ¿la lucha contra la corrupción es rentable para los estados?
¿Es rentable? No, esto es como el sector privado. Cuando das charlas de compliance en el sector privado, el compliance es un gasto para el sector privado, esto lo sabemos. Ahora, si nosotros no estructuramos legislaciones fuertes y prevención especialmente, esto no va a funcionar. O sea, acá tiene que haber un convencimiento y una legislación fuerte, porque si no, esto se pasa siendo muchos mensajes, muchos, como diríamos, frases de moda, el tone and top y todo eso, pero después no se aplica. Porque hemos tenido sociedades, y no quiero meterme en demás países, hemos tenido países que han certificado programas de compliance y la empresa después tuvo un soborno. Entonces, ¿tengo el programa o no lo tengo? ¿Funciona o no funciona? Entonces, lo que yo creo que también fuera de la cultura, hay que trabajar, hay buenos trabajos de educación mañana anticorrupción. Yo tengo un trabajo sobre educación anticorrupción. Hay que trabajar un poco, como dice la ICAC de Hong Kong, que tiene un muy buen empuje, trabaja en tres puntos: el castigo, la prevención y la educación. Y trabajar a mediano plazo, si no, esto no se va a solucionar a corto plazo. En este contexto de pandemia tenemos un problema de apuro y de necesidad y de crisis económica y de salud. Entonces, el Estado te va a decir, pero vos me pedís que todavía compre a mejor precio. Y sí, porque los fondos no son tuyos, son los que pagamos los impuestos. Entonces, el problema es de convencimiento. Yo creo que tiene que haber una mezcla, pero si no ponemos herramientas nuevas en este contexto, vamos a seguir haciendo discursos. Discúlpenme que lo diga, se lo digo desde un país donde sufrimos esto permanentemente. Pasan los gobiernos y seguimos teniendo el mismo problema. Tuvimos una corrupción sistémica de un gobierno, pasamos a otro con fenómenos corruptivos y ahora volvemos a lo mismo. Entonces, algo pasa. Sí.
Eso es algo que sufrimos en prácticamente toda América Latina.
Claro, sí, bueno, también se dice que hay una cultura de América Latina por nuestros jóvenes, por nuestra joven edad. Yo creo que lo podemos superar, pero podemos trabajar a 10 años dándole, como le damos educación sexual, educación vial, educación anticorrupción en las escuelas del jardín. En España hay muchos folletos de transparencia para los jardines. Y es una propuesta que es trabajar a 10 años, entonces genera una sociedad con otros valores.
Es una gran parte. Y ahí tienen de ejemplo al vecino ahí, Uruguay, que sí ha mejorado. O sea, todavía no está totalmente limpio, pero sí ha habido mejoras a lo largo de las
Pero yo lo que quiero decir es, si ustedes quieren hacer un máster en práctica de corrupción, vengan acá. Y no solamente el gobierno nacional. Si ustedes empiezan a investigar a los gobiernos provinciales o estaduales y municipales, Dios mío, cuando empiecen a ver las decisiones de gobiernos provinciales, donde emiten una resolución diciendo que si no está procesado puede participar de la licitación, porque es amigo. Entonces, es una estructura que funciona, una corrupción sistémica que funciona y funciona y funciona. Perdón por a lo mejor mis posiciones, pero es de esta forma.
Una pregunta de María de Los Ángeles Estrada, la directora de nuestra iniciativa de transparencia anticorrupción aquí en la Escuela de Ciencias Sociales y Gobierno. Dice, ¿cómo podemos prevenir la corrupción en situaciones de emergencia? Por ejemplo, ¿pudimos haber previsto en el ámbito de las compras públicas la corrupción que se está presentando para enfrentar la pandemia? Ya contestaste parcialmente esta pregunta.
Sí, el tema de compras hay que ser claro. Vos no podés controlar todo. Entonces hay que poner un límite, un coto a las compras y decir de aquí para abajo, bueno, hagamos rendición de cuentas. Acá el problema que tenemos en corrupción es el control ex ante y ex post. Si vos querés prevenir, tenés que ir ex ante. Si vos querés ver el cadáver ex post. Entonces ya cuando, hoy con las transferencias electrónicas, si yo voy a controlar después que pasa el hecho, ya la plata se fue. A ver si nos entendemos. Vamos a ser claros. La plata se va. Entonces, ¿qué puedo perseguir? Tengo que prevenir. Para prevenir tengo que ponerme cuál es el objetivo en monto de compras. Y después combinar. Es muy interesante el tema del control social. Incorporar el control social serio, incorporar herramientas administrativas, mapas de riesgo, ¿se entiende? El tema de las adendas de los contratos. O sea, dentro de lo que es compras públicas hay mucha burocracia, por supuesto adrede, para que no sea claro y todo mezclado y todo embarullado. ¿Para qué? Para que ahí tengo la oportunidad de sacar mi renta. ¿Se entiende? Creo que es claro. A lo mejor lo digo desde el punto de vista de la Argentina, pero aquí es todo muy complicado siempre. ¿Para qué? Para tener la oportunidad, ¿no? Sí, si tienen más no hay problema.
Es más o menos universal esa observación, no es único en Argentina.
Por eso. Pero creo que la cuestión es desarrollar la prevención. Nosotros tenemos que prevenir. ¿Dónde? Donde tengamos la ejecución de más dinero. Hoy no lo vas a poder, hoy el caballo no lo vas a poder tomar porque está lanzado a que vos tenés que gastar y tenés que colocar no solamente gastos de salud, tenés que colocar dinero en el bolsillo de la gente. O sea, es un poco complicado, pero los protocolos hay que seguirlos.
Hay otra pregunta de Francisco González. Dice,
Sí.
países como Chile, que de acuerdo a indicadores internacionales de transparencia internacional, ha mostrado altos índices de probidad y baja corrupción. ¿Cómo se explica la baja credibilidad institucional que se ha ido agravando aún más desde la crisis de octubre del año pasado? Y ojo que tenemos un sistema legal bastante duro e instituciones como la Contraloría General de la República y el Consejo para la Transparencia. La percepción ciudadana va a la baja.
Yo le voy a contestar al amigo chileno, tengo muchos amigos chilenos, y le puedo decir dos cosas. El comentario de la empresa de certificación de compliance es chilena. Entonces le certificaron el programa de compliance y después tuvo un soborno. No estoy culpando a los chilenos. En segundo, la percepción es una cosa y la realidad es otra. Yo creo que hay una percepción que hay baja corrupción en Chile, pero también que vaya a los casos de la Contraloría. Hace 2 años que los casos de Contraloría locales han crecido. Entonces, es muy difícil generalizar en estos casos. O sea, baja la corrupción, ¿qué es un índice de percepción? Es lo que yo creo. Ahora, ¿es real? Es indicativo. ¿Se entiende? O sea, en realidad, para tener una estadística real, son los casos de corrupción que están investigados, denunciados, investigados y castigados. Eso es un índice de corrupción. ¿Se entiende? Nosotros estamos trabajando con percepciones. No estoy condenando a las percepciones. Me parece una herramienta interesante. Hacemos ejercicios econométricos, pero el tema es que vamos siempre detrás de las situaciones. Y ese es el problema. Nosotros tenemos que ir antes de la situación en decisión política.
Otra observación o pregunta, no sé, desde la Fiscalía Anticorrupción de Quintana Roo, aquí en México, dice, trabajamos en la prevención del delito. Hemos diseñado un curso taller de conductas penales que comenten los funcionarios públicos, tomando en cuenta los delitos de acción y de omisión y que han recuperado activos y obtenido nuestras primeras sentencias condenatorias. Bueno, felicidades.
Felicitaciones. Acá no se recuperó, lo que se recuperó ahora se está entregando por un cambio político, así que para que ustedes vean, acá puede pasar cualquier cosa. O sea, los que están presos salieron, esto es muy interesante. Argentina es extraordinario en ese caso. Pero eso es lo que vale, recuperar el tema de... Pero cuidado también, porque como dije en la charla, la corrupción muta. Entonces, como el narcotráfico hoy está con criptomonedas, y hoy, si ustedes investigan más, hay más cantidad de offshore por evasión impositiva. Entonces, cuidado. Nosotros siempre estamos atrás de las situaciones. Cuidado con eso. Dije, herramienta nueva para problemas nuevos. No herramientas viejas para problemas nuevos, es imposible. Con todo respeto, ¿no? Lo digo. Pero esto es real. No podemos correr atrás de la situación. Sí, respondo. Lo que quieran preguntar.
No, sí, ¿no? Este es para mí. Las exposiciones de mañana serán... No, mañana tenemos más sesiones en español. Todo el programa, ahorita les voy a enseñar, pero espérame, hay otra pregunta para Vicente. ¿Qué propuestas de innovación en prevención a la corrupción considera pertinente? ¿Solo educación como cambio cultural?
No. Yo creo los 3 pilares de Hong Kong los creo y escribí un libro ahora que sale, ahora está por salir el Sistema Nacional, Provincial y Municipal Anticorrupción, que lo escribí, ya sale en unos meses, aplicable, herramientas administrativas. En castigo, ir a cortes anticorrupción directamente. El tema de investigación, separarlo, funcionarios independientes por concurso, este es un problema político. En el tema prevención, herramientas. Hoy el tema de inteligencia artificial está dando muy buenos resultados. Utilizar inteligencia artificial. Esto es fácil. ¿En cuánto se ejecuta el presupuesto? El 30% del presupuesto en obra pública. Y bueno, pongámoslo con la obra pública. El BID tiene muy buenas herramientas, el mapa de la obra pública, la publicación. Brasil ha tenido un muy buen portal de obras públicas que fue la base del lavallato. O sea, cuando los periodistas bajaban los contratos de los sitios de Brasil, nosotros por supuesto los contratos nunca, pero, o sea, si transparento más la cuestión, puedo utilizar herramientas de prevención. las adendas. Siempre lo que tengo que colocar es algunas situaciones donde yo pueda controlar ciertos procesos, porque en esos procesos se me van. No lo puedo contestar en esta respuesta. Hay herramientas, control social, herramientas administrativas, mapas de riesgo, por supuesto preventivos. De cada obra, yo puedo estar, esto lo puedo alimentar también, ¿no? No hay ningún, y en el caso de educación, empezar con una educación anticorrupción a 10 años y trabajar sobre los valores.
Bien, una última pregunta, otra vez.
Sí.
Ah, no, hay dos más. Ah, no. Pide Mike Denley el link para el libro. Pero
El libro todavía no salió. No,
está,
no
¿verdad?
salió. Está en el horno el libro. Está en el horno,
Sí.
en la cocina
Sí,
nuestra.
a lo mejor si puede colocar su correo electrónico aquí en el chat para
Sí,
que,
cómo
para
no,
que se
cómo no.
pongan en contacto.
Y desde ya les agradezco, te agradezco, Bonnie, la participación y les agradezco a todos los colegas. Yo tengo muchas investigaciones sobre esto, tengo investigaciones econométricas, impactos sobre barreras fiscales, de desarrollo humano. He visto hoy muchos buenos trabajos sobre pobreza. Realmente de muy buen nivel el Congreso y gracias por participar. Yo ahora les coloco el chat mi mail en el chat y lo que necesiten me lo envían. El libro todavía falta, pero cuando lo tengo ya se los voy a enviar. Muchas gracias.
No, muchísimas gracias a ti, Vicente, por esta presentación muy interesante sobre los varios aspectos de la corrupción y lo que se requiere para minimizarlo. Ahora me toca a mí, ya terminamos el día y les quiero señalar primero que voy a compartir mi pantalla, que si van a la página de la conferencia, here on the registration page for the conference, if you go down, vamos abajo, you can find the complete program. Aquí está el programa. Y mañana empezamos con la ponencia magistral de Lunes, será en inglés. ¿Se ve? Y luego esta primera sesión, según entiendo, todas las presentaciones estas van a ser en inglés también, pero es una sesión muy interesante sobre las herramientas que podemos utilizar. No todos estos son académicos, nos van a enseñar, por ejemplo, Aida Florín es un activista de Rumania que nos va a enseñar cómo él ha utilizado el acceso a la información para exponer sobre gastos municipales. Entonces aquí tenemos varias ponencias muy interesantes en inglés, salvo esta última que va a ser en español. Y luego tenemos toda una sesión en español y luego en inglés. So most of tomorrow's sessions, there'll be about half and half tomorrow, half English, half Spanish, and you can find the complete program here in the link that I will put in the chat. Chat. And you should have this already, but I'm not getting the chat. Okay. And the other thing I want to show you here is that if you go down below the program, you'll see this Red de la Academia contra la Corrupción en las Américas. Si damos clic aquí, we have a directory. These are participants from this year and previous years in the Academia Against Corruption in the Americas conference who have agreed to appear in our directory of anti-corruption experts. So you can find many of their emails here you want to get in touch with them. Entonces aquí tenemos este directorio para poder ubicar a la gente. Si quieres formar parte de este directorio, puedes enviarme un correo a mi correo, que es tony@tech.mx. Okay. If you would like to join this directory, feel free to email me. Many of you have already indicated that you're interested in joining a network in one way or another, and we will be in touch with you. So I want to thank today's presenters. The main purpose of this conference is so that I can learn from you. Very selfish that way. And so I have learned so much from every one of you. This is, as announced, a multidisciplinary and transnational conference, and I have learned so much about the United States, Mexico, Guatemala, Brazil, Argentina, and concepts drawn from law. I've learned about civil society, organized crime, politics, about the importance of coalitions, both political coalitions and civil society coalitions. I've learned about impunity and what fuels impunity and why impunity also fuels corruption, and about the importance of justice systems and how justice systems can be improved and what helps make justice systems work better. So I have had a really great day, and I've received many compliments throughout the day for this conference. The quality of this conference is all because of you, and I am really grateful to have all of you speakers with us, and also I'm grateful for all of the attendees that have been watching these presentations all day. Thank you all very much for joining us. We have another big day tomorrow. It'll be an hour longer tomorrow, but it's going to be another really great day. Again, all of these videos are on YouTube under the channel Transparencia y Anticorrupción. We'll just write that out here. I've discovered there are 2 channels like that. Do not choose the one that is associated with the presidency, but you'll see one that has a little piece of our logo, and that's the YouTube channel that you want. So all of this will be stored there, and eventually I believe we will also have links on our website to these presentations. So those of you who have presented will also be able to include links to the videos from your websites. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Everyone have a restful evening, stay safe and stay healthy.